Uh, Hi, everyone. To begin with, I'd just like to say where I come from, give you a bit of my biography, and the kind of concepts and themes I follow as a photographer. And then from there, I'll be able to show you the photos, and then we can get going. Cool. So I was born and have been raised in Johannesburg, which is in South Africa. I did my honors in fine arts at the University of the Witwatersrand, and last year I completed a year course in photojournalism. This year I've been working as a freelance photographer, as well as working in media rooms, working as a photojournalist, and then as well being part of a lot of photographic projects involved at the Market Photo Workshop, which you'll see later on. My work since 2008 has been focused on the concepts of memory and transformation. So, and their significance within South Africa's political climate. In particular, I aim to address the significance of South African history through its land and the locations within it. So I do a lot of landscape photography. The themes I explore, just to reiterate, it's memory, layering, and transformation. Very basically, South Africa is probably most famous for its connection to the apartheid government, which was a government that was in control since before 1994, where people of different races were divided according to their races, and the party in power, the apartheid government, was responsible for supporting a white minority of peoples. So you would see the vast majority of the country, which were black citizens, were forcibly removed from locations, and they were basically sent to the outskirts of the city. They were forced to carry passports and passbooks all over the country, and basically they were restricted in their movement. So since 1994, we've had a democracy. The apartheid government stepped down, and that's probably where you would know the famous name Nelson Mandela from. He was our first president, Democratic Republic president. So the themes of transformation, memory, and layering are quite important to South Africans because we have a very bad history of which a lot of people would like to forget, as well as people want to try change. So for being a South African photographer, historical references, striking major economic differences are always themes that are that are explored a lot. The way I approach photography is basically I have the intention to create landscapes that allow the viewer to wander through them. I want people to start looking for evidence and proof within photographs. So often I'll go to spaces and leave traces behind, or take photographs of the traces or the remnants of an event, depending on whether it's historically significant or something else. It's important to me to push the boundaries of photography, both in the photograph's physical recreation as well as its conceptual approach. And one of the main questions I ask myself when I do photography is, how can I challenge it, as well as what is a photograph and how a photograph should look, and contesting that. So in 2008, I began a project based on my personal experiences within the city of Johannesburg. To place it more correctly, I just started varsity, which is kind of when you finish your main schooling and you go into university. And I lived very far away, so I had to drive through the city almost every day, like a 45-minute drive to get into varsity. And because of the fact that I was driving so much, I got to see so much of the city. And basically, I was really shocked to feel like this overwhelming sense of density and the amount of people that was really in the city and the different sort of suburbs that you drive through. They're all little like niches of different subcultures that you experience on your way through because of the way the city was divided originally. So what I did here is I created digitally stitched panoramic photographs, taken up spaces that I would drive past every day, and yet unknown to me, these were spaces where people were living in them. So I began exploring and photographing the traces left behind by vagrants in these areas. So it was important to me to try create, or my intention was to create, to make the viewer read the signs and look for traces left behind by people living in spaces. And it was also important to think about these spaces as either are they a public space or what is it to invade a public space. If I was to go to a person's home and take photographs of their house without them knowing, I'm sure that they would feel, well, when I put that sort of question to myself, I felt like I was being very invasive when I went into these sorts of locations and started photographing them. The project's importance was about changing the viewer's perspective about the function of space. I'd been so accustomed to imagining these spaces as a form of transport that when I realized that they were something different to someone else, I really began thinking of how through history, the history of South Africa, the transformation of space has changed so dramatically from it being a space where it was constructed to divide people to having to replace that and change that. Okay, and there's some more. Okay, so in 2009 I was continuing on with my fine arts degree, and what I really wanted to focus on, well, I began to focus more and more on the idea of this density of the city. And so I began a process to process and layer photographs, printing them out and putting them on top of each other to literally refer to the layers of density of the city, as well as conceptually convey my sense of a fractured or disoriented experience of what it is to drive through the city every day. This work up here consisted of over 1,000 photographically printed Google Map screen grabs that covered the northern half of Johannesburg. Each photograph was stolen from the internet, which originally was its purpose as a digitally designed object, and then I transformed it into something that was a physical representation of the city. Johannesburg comprises of an inner and outer zone, and the urban division between rich and poor is reinforced by further division. So you can't really see it very well, but there's a long line of a highway, and basically that's what the government used to divide the areas between a township and the places where white suburban people would live. So everyone talks about in Johannesburg either living in the inside or the outside ring. So I live just on the outside ring, so it's kind of weird because I always had to drive into the ring to go study. So everyone thought of me as an outsider. So I just have a quote from Sarah Nuttall, who wrote Johannesburg, the Elusive Metropolis, and it really explains what the system of apartheid really meant for people. So, if you will, the system of apartheid formed a city that was delineated by race, spatial dispersal and division, and by extension awareness, was created according to the color of one's skin. In post-apartheid, identity perspectives change. The growth of the city is no longer limited to a race, and as a result, it is characterized by an overlapping of racial divisionism. On the other hand, the post-apartheid process, which spans over the last 2 decades, is now being reversed, redistributed, and reconsidered to include those who were spatially segregated. Reconstruction and reformation are essential elements in the post-apartheid renewal, and this condition is perhaps what incites me and other South African artists to search so extensively into notions of belonging and the perception of identity as we try to find a place for ourselves within South African society. I wanted to use this media specifically to question the idea of ownership of a photograph, and likewise the ownership of land. Something that is constantly debated among South Africans since apartheid is the issue of land, and especially reclaiming the land that was taken away. Then I began completing this work. The idea of land being a part of my heritage and personal identity was always in conflict, as well as having a desire to challenge an idea to people what a landscape can mean. Is it just a landscape, a piece of area, or is it something more? So we then move on to this piece here. I went from panoramics to more general aerial perspectives as part of a way to escape the bird's eye view. So I wanted to really remove the personal from the images themselves. So what I did was I created these. This was a giant wall-sized, almost installation, and it was consisted of Google Earth images of name changes, street name changes that had changed. So this one was Hendrik Verwoerd Street, who was a very famous politician during the apartheid, and they renamed it to Malibongwe Drive, or I think Malibongwe or else Beyersnoordeer. And basically it's the name changes were it's one of the things that's constantly going around in South Africa, and it's a hugely widely debated topic, because there still are a lot of people who question the reason why they would change the name to replace it. I don't know if it really happens here, but we've had several name changes. So, for example, the Johannesburg International Airport changed to the Jan Smuts Airport, and now it's the OR Tambo Airport. And it just kind of gets ridiculous, the amount of name changes that they go through, because it just costs the government more and more money. But it seems like it's really important to them, and important to some people, but to others, they don't really care. So on the top layer is Google Earth images, and then on the bottom was scanned-in maps of that dated before 1994. So they used to have the old road names on them. And so then I created this installation of a man sitting on a telephone wire. Okay, so in 2010, I began doing my photojournalism course. So this is the lighter section of what I've done. Basically, I wanted to put in these photographs just to illustrate the wide diversity of the country, the fact that, it's not always doom and gloom. We are normal people. We don't ride on giraffes, and we don't each have a pet elephant. I have been asked that. So here's a brief taste. There is a lot of crime. For me, my photojournalism course, I really enjoyed doing hard news events, which are coming now. There are a lot of strikes that happen in South Africa, partly because everyone's quite upset that everyone else can get a wage increase, but they can't. And we talk about, in Johannesburg, we call it strike season, which is about 3 months of the year when everyone goes on strike. But there's a lot of crises that happen around Johannesburg, a lot of violent crimes. This one here, it was a whole township torched a police car because they were upset. Now, I think the policeman had done something to one of the ladies in the, had assaulted one of the ladies who were in the township. So they all took up arms and torched the cars, and then it sparked this whole a manhunt by the police to capture every single man in the town, which was like 150 people. And they chucked them all into police cars and sped them off, and they spent the night in jail. But you see it quite a bit where you'll get people in crimes. This was a giant drug bust that they had at the OR Tambo airport, and that's all Viagra, illegal Viagra. More strikes. This is outside the Sasol department, which is our leading petrol manufacturer. Okay. Another aspect of the photojournalism course, or well, what I do is I really enjoy doing photo documentary essays. And this was an essay about a student-run clinic in Braamfontein that organized and offered free medical aid to anyone who wanted to come get the medical aid. You know, pills, your basic medication, and then they give referrals for these guys. If their condition was bad, they'd send them off to a proper hospital. I do remember there were quite a few incidents. The one guy had a really bad stitches that had gone almost gangrenous, and they had to remove the stitches and clean out the wounds. I've never seen so much pus. Likewise, they've removed bullets from wounds, and the unique thing about it is that they do it at night, because most of the time these guys are walking hundreds of kilometers a week to collect cardboard boxes to recycle, and then they make their living out of making that money. So they don't actually have time to go during normal hours to go see a doctor or something like that. So the students offer them this service for them, and it's completely, they don't get anything out of it, but they just do it as a service. It's not part of their required coursework or anything like that. And it's just like stories like this that are quite heroic about, you know, in South Africa, being able to see some of that stuff, which really is inspiring. As you know, we had our World Cup, the World Cup last year. So we were quite, it was quite funny because we all heard these stories about how the turfs, everyone was so worried that there wouldn't be grass on the turfs. And that, I don't know, the stadiums wouldn't be built in time. And there was a whole media hype about it. And what I did was, this is the Australian national football side, the Socceroos practice turf, and I organized to go take photographs of the building and the making of it. The interesting thing is South African weather is incredibly unpredictable. For about 4 weeks we had steady rain, and the entire field had completely flooded, and you can see some of the photos at the top there. The drainage system was terrible, so they had to redo the entire thing with like a month to go before the World Cup started, or the Socceroos arrived. So there was this like mad rush to finish off the job, but they did it in the end, and it was a really nice pitch. The Socceroos dedicated the pitch to the school that they built it on, and that's what happened a lot of the time. Is any practice pitch that they built at a school would go to the school afterwards. So it was about reusing the surface. Okay, so in 2011 I began working on a project which is called the Hostels and Compounds Project. And the Hostels and Compounds Project was a collaborative work between Kanya College, a local university, the Mining Museum in Newtown, and the Market Photo Workshop. And the Hostels and Compounds Project aimed to create a photographic archive of some of Johannesburg's most historical buildings, which were used throughout its history. If you don't know, Johannesburg is known as the City of Gold for a reason, because they have huge, huge reefs of gold underneath the surface, but it takes thousands of migrant laborers to dig down underneath the surface, kilometers underneath ground, to retrieve the gold. And so it takes a lot of man labor. So one of the, historically, when it first started, a lot of black migrant workers were used to mine these gold areas because of the space, because they were cheap. They would do it for nothing, and they could be exploited. So historically, these sites have many layers of cultural influence, from that to the history of apartheid, where they used them as hostel compounds to keep municipal workers out of the city during the night, so that they could lock them up. And now they're used as family compounds. They've been converted into family compounds, so they're still used by the government for municipal workers. And in terms of conditions, they vary. You can get a wonderfully new-built hostel compound, but at the same time you can get compounds that have been there for over 50 years, so 50 to 100, 50 years. So what I did was, what was part of the project was to take straightforward shots of each room, different types of rooms, different types of blocks. But what I found myself doing was, because of the amount of space that's available, there are like 5 or 6 guys living in a room that's 9 meters squared. So it's very tight living space, and because it's cheaper for them, but it's also because there's nowhere else really to stay. So they have to do it. And because of that, I began incorporating a lot of photographs with the people who were staying in there. And I ended up creating almost a series of portraits of the residents or the people who were living in there. Another thing to understand is that most of these rooms are designed exactly the same. So you'll go from one hostel to the next, and they'll look pretty much, on the outside, they'll look exactly the same. But on the inside, it's completely different, as each room is decorated differently according to where the person grew up, where the person's from, which people are living in there, which soccer side they support. So it's really exciting to be able to explore those sorts of situations. And then I also found myself asking them more and more often if I could just go and visit the older rooms or the oldest rooms in the hostel, and to see who's been living in these spaces for the longest. And you'll also find, like, they call it the Nduna, who's like the main staff keeper, or the old man. It literally means the old man. He's usually been there, around there, living in the same place for 50 years, but temporarily, because they're not really their homes. They belong to someone else. So there's this idea that these people live in these spaces only temporarily, but they make it their homes. So you can see all the different soccer sides. Those are soccer sides on the wall that they support. Orlando Pirates, our local club. You'll also see lots of ANC posters or IFP posters. Old radios. It's making breakfast. This is an interesting space. They're brewing beer. It's a brewery. Those tubs there are filled with vats of beer, homemade beer that they drink straight out the vat once it's been fermented. Okay, so another project that I've been involved in is a project on Makweteng, which is Makweteng is a formal location of an informal settlement in a town called Potchefstroom. And Potchefstroom is really interesting because it's known as an Afrikaans city, or it's kind of known as an Afrikaner nationalist city, which is basically the people who ran apartheid back in the day. So the city itself has a very complex layering about it, and Makweteng was the informal settlement, and then they removed all the inhabitants of that, and then they renamed it Meadow Park. You'll see another example. You probably have heard of Sapphire Town, which they then replaced and named it Triumph, which is triumph in Afrikaans. So you get there are a lot of these spaces all over the country, and this was one of the locations. And having it been in an Afrikaans location or an Afrikaans city, it's also sparked a lot of debate because there are also a lot of name changes that have been going on that have real significance. There was Jan van Riebeeck Street. Jan van Riebeeck was the first colonist that arrived in South Africa. He's a Dutch colonialist, and the Afrikaner nation, or the Afrikaners, basically, it was their colonies that originated through them, and basically, he's known as an icon through Afrikaner history. And they've replaced the street name of Jan van Riebeeck Street to Peter Makabe Street. And if you've heard of, well, I'm not sure if the local news has come through, but Peter Makabe is famous for inventing the song Skiet die Boer, which means shoot the Boer. And the Boers were Afrikaners. So he was an ANC revolutionist, and the public actually was so upset with this name change that they've I'll go to the photograph quickly, that they spray painted every single street name out, and placed Jan van Riebeeck Street on the top of their houses. So it's a huge public outcry almost against name changes, against the way people are talking about history and memory changing, and the idea that I think specifically in Potch, they can get away with it without having a problem with it. If you were to do something in Johannesburg like that, you'd be arrested, but it seems like it can just go on in there without a problem. Okay, so a lot of these photographs are, as you can see, they're multi-layered, multi-merged photographs. And the idea is that I wanted to mimic or I wanted to recreate the idea of multiple perspectives, the idea that people have different interpretations of a location, and depending on your personal history, you could have a very different interpretation from what I could have. Specifically, this project is supposed to be for Makweteng. We're having an exhibition there. So a lot of the people who will be seeing this exhibition will know what these spaces represent, but also for them it's not something that's good history. It's bad history for most of the people from the informal settlements. But yeah, it was about forgetting memory as well as changing memory, as well as layering the memory. Okay. What I do have here is a couple more photographs taken from the World Cup project, as well as photographs taken of the hostels and compounds. And what I'll do is I just want to leave it running, and then I'll explain to you what I'm supposed to be doing here. Slideshow, there we go. Cool. And explain what's on the photos. This was from the World Cup project. It's a town, a suburb called La Rochelle, which is a Portuguese community in South Africa. You've got a lot of these Portuguese communities in South Africa. In Johannesburg in particular, they've got, it's incredibly dense, but it's also a lot of Mozambicans live in the area, and there's a lot of contention between the black Mozambicans and the European Portuguese guys because they don't like each other. A lot of racial conflict that goes on, and you'll see a lot of this where there we go, play. You'll see a lot of this where you'll have people defacing public property with graffiti. What I did was I went and interacted with the community during the World Cup. It was the last couple of days before the World Cup began. So we wanted to get a feeling of what it was like for the people in general during the World Cup, whether it really affected them or not. And the general consensus was everyone was hyped up about the World Cup, but most people were just going on about their daily lives. And it wasn't that much of an influence. I was at a festival, Rancho Folklore Festival. There's a lot of youth that's kind of mixed their different cultures together. So they'll have Portuguese sort of backgrounds, and they'll celebrate their Portuguese heritage, but at the same time they'll mix up as Africans and take up reggae and do, all those sorts of conventions. This was a LAN, which is like a gaming system. In South Africa, our technology is not as great as yours here. So we don't have uncapped ADSL. Not everyone has a computer. And to be part of this part of like niche is really weird. People kind of think of you as someone really different when you play computer games all day long. But this was a group of friends who'd been playing for years and years and years. And they get together every now and again. You see the hokra and them playing throughout the night. And the hokra is actually laced with vodka. I don't know if you guys do that. The hubbly bubbly. That thing. That's laced with vodka. So they kind of get high the whole time that they're playing, as well as get drunk. And it becomes like a big game sort of festival for the entire time. Here's some more photographs from the Hostels project. Okay. So what I'm doing here in Salzburg is I'm here to take photographs on the idea, or continue on what I've been doing, working with, as the idea of memory, layering of memories and of the past and the present photography, past and present. So I'm here to. For me, this project is more than simply an exploration of the Salzburg landscape. It is about attempting to interpret the significance of the developments and transformations within the city. So Salzburg, the academy itself, is an institution, and through years and layers, through years of students coming through and going to the same institution, what is it that makes people want to come back more? What is it about the place that is leaving their own fragments and their own residues behind? So that's what was really interesting. My interest is between that and then coming to the city as a resident, but also as a tourist. So I'm kind of conflicted because I really want to go take photographs of all the touristy stuff, but at the same time, you have to remember that you're a resident, and it's about creating photography that's based around that idea of who am I, what is my purpose. So, as photographers pass through the academy, they represent a dynamic and transient feature. And yet, as these photographers depart, they leave behind a trace of their presence that becomes a part of the Salzburg landscape itself. Thus, the Salzburg landscape grows from the residues left behind by photographers. However, it is not the photographers who become embodied with these residues, but rather the institutions, the buildings, and the architecture. Thus, to interpret the Salzburg space, my interest lies in this conversation that exists between Salzburg's architecture and its presence built up due to the layering of residues left behind by its artists. So you can see the kind of conditions that are in. Oh, you're not supposed to be there. You can see the conditions that people are living in. Another typical African thing is to adapt a space So with 5 or 6 people living in the same living zone, they'll convert a toilet to a kitchen. Or they'll have many people sharing a communal kitchen zone, and then they'll cook for an entire community. So not one person cooks, but they'll cook for 20 people. That's the kind of conditions. That actually used to be an old reception that they converted. That's an old brewery. And that is a recreational center. Inside, that's where the Reverend sleeps. That's an old gym. A lot of the time you'll see guys sleeping in beds. It's because they've done night shifts and they come back during the day and they don't want to move out of the photograph, so they just stay there. So despite me trying to convince them to move. So I would have to go reshoot that place a little bit later on in the day once they'd woken up. That photograph back there, that's where they cook a cow's, it's a butchery. They butcher a cow and then they cook it straight on the braai, via barbecue. That's mildew. That's it's a still running municipal brewery where the locals can come and drink. We'll be back. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.